Welcome to Truth Sentinel again. Do you remember when you came on previously what it was about?
I believe I was discussing Glenn Greenwald about something specific regarding him.
Do you remember the episode number?
No, I don't remember the episode number at all.
Oh,
I tend not to listen to myself back.
Me. Yeah, I can't either actually, but yeah, Luke did come on one of our early Truth Sentinel shows. I reckon it was in the early days actually. You'd have to scan back quite a few episodes. I can't even remember what we were talking about. But anyway, that could be old age setting in, I don't know.
I think it was about some kind of WikiLeaks thing. Glenn Greenwald was about it. I somehow think it was about this idea of leaking and government, secret documents being leaked to the public, and the ethical nature behind that. There was some sort of documentary about Glenn Greenwald, which I was commenting on.
Yes, indeed. For the benefit of viewers who don't remember you, and that's probably everybody, not because you're not memorable, just because we can't even remember the chat we had. So, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? I mean, you recently have been studying at Oxford, is that right?
At Cambridge, actually. I recently graduated with a master's at Cambridge. I know, oh dear, the belly of the beast. I was studying a master's in education, globalization, and international development.
Good, Luke. That makes you sound very intelligent, and that's the kind of person we like to have on Truth Sentinel.
Well, I don't know. I figure, actually, I think these days, the longer the degree title, the more questionable it is. You can question its academic rigor.
We'll touch on that a bit later, but let's also find a bit more out about you. Like, didn't you spend some time in Sudan recently?
Yes. Prior to that, I spent 3 years in Sudan, working with refugees and IDPs, and as a general teacher around the country. I spent a lot of time with the military there because I was teaching the Sudanese military, and these experiences obviously led me to undertake the masters in education, and I have a specific interest both in education and in the developing world, specifically sub-Saharan Africa.
Why are you interested in sub-Saharan Africa?
Well, why are you interested in Ukraine, Scott? I think I've always enjoyed Africa as a region. I went there when I was quite younger, and I enjoy varying aspects of the culture, of the social interaction between people, of the warm freedom I get in some of the countries there, and the vibrancy of life there, which I contrast to my own. I think I've always felt more, I don't know, more, without sounding fluffy, able to exist without restriction. You know, us British were quite reserved. So I think out of places, certain areas in which you travel enable you to come out of that reservedness and discover different aspects about yourself. And of course, when you travel, you compare yourself to other cultures. So I think actually living in Sudan has probably been a big influence on my views, actually. Living in quite a conservative Islamic society and meeting and interacting with the people there, comparing it with my own and different outlooks people have on the world.
Yes,
so I never really...
Talking of outlooks, that's part of the reason why we decided to have our chat today. We were going to sort of explore the differences in our outlooks and maybe try to explain some of the reasons. Would you say that's what we were kind of aiming at here with our chat?
Well, yes. Again, I think it is to define both our political positions and what we endeavour to gain by having these regular chats.
Well, personally, I mean, I haven't thought about it too much. As you know, I don't like to plan too much, but I think it's good to explore the differences, because I would say I'm probably more towards the idea of a conspiratorial mind, maybe what some people have classed as truthers, although I don't like labels really. There are some crazy truthers out there, and there are some that are just looking for the truth. And so, if a truther is someone who likes to find out the truth, then yes, I am a truther, but I don't like some of the implications that people might link to that label. But I thought it would be interesting to compare our thoughts, because I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, would you say you're more of a mainstream thinker, or how would you describe your perspective on the world?
Well, again, as to be said, the devil is in the details. What do you mean by mainstream thinker? I think many of my opinions, fall outside of perhaps the mainstream political spectrum at the moment. I find in many cases I'm exasperated by the level of debate that goes on in a particular country, in this particular country, in Britain at the moment, and throughout, I suppose, the Anglosphere in the West. I think to define myself is when I talk about personal political views, I think there are two levels to it. One is on the individual basis, what you think your ideal sort of type of society would be like and how that would function. And the other being on a more practical, real societal basis, what is best for all the individuals doing in that. To give an example, it might be on an issue like, for example, abortion might be a decent issue, whereby personally I don't particularly like it. I wouldn't ever do it myself, and I would, if someone I knew did it, I would probably attempt to convince them out of it. But probably for society as a whole, it's a relatively reasonable, easy. It's a thing that perhaps has a lot of efficacy. When I look at the positives and negatives of having being pro-choice or being pro-life, I would come down on the pro-choice side. So I think there are these two elements in political thought, and I would say personally, I am a small c conservative, meaning not the party, but more of a sort of Burkean philosophy in conservatism, which is, recently prospered over 3 or 4 years. But in a societal element, given the particular realities of our time, I am more of a libertarian, which probably an economic libertarian, which basically means the freedom of individuals to make their own choice, and without restrictions or a variety of government regulation. I think.
This is why I don't like labels, though, because if I read a short paragraph explaining what a libertarian is, I'd probably say, yeah, I'm one of those too. But then, if I read an explanation of what a modern anarchist is, I'm one of those too. But no, I would say I'm not conservative or Labour or Democrat or Republican. Then people think, okay, I know exactly what all your thoughts are about each subject. Then, which is, I just think is you can't label anyone in society with a one-word title to represent their thoughts. I don't think.
Well, firstly, I'm a small c. I'm nothing to do with the party, to be honest. But why I would define myself as that is, I suppose, a part of a movement with a broad degree of thinkers that I somewhat identify and have informed my ideas. In terms of I mean, obviously, you're right in terms of labels, as it can. And it has increasingly these days just formed a kind of baton in which people can club each other over continually.
I think it's a stupid concept that a lot of people have fallen for. That, especially in America, where they classify themselves as a Democrat or a Republican, and people over here in England. I'm not actually in England at the moment. I'm in Thailand, but. People class themselves as conservative or Labour, and I just think it's kind of strange, because by saying that, people are sort of then think that they identify you with certain people. Like, now you've said you're a conservative, I identify you with David Cameron. So I would say he's quite a mainstream thinker.
Well, as I said before twice, it's more the philosophy, not the party, and many philosophical conservatives might not think David Cameron is like that. Many of David Cameron's policies didn't espouse what is a conservative philosophy. In response to your point about labels, I think labels are useful to an extent as they define what sort of philosophical and political traditions you identify with. So as a conservative, I might say I identify more with the Glorious Revolution than the French Revolution when it comes to that. And I don't think violent political change is attractive for society. I think gradual change in acknowledgement of existing realities and adapting to things are more important.
See, when you say you're a libertarian, I think, well, there's probably going to be a lot of things that we agree on. But then when you say you're conservative, I think, well, David Cameron is like my arch nemesis. He's someone I would think represents everything I despise about the world. I just think
Why? May I ask why? I mean, I don't particularly like David Cameron.
I can't stand David Cameron because he's like he actually went to some of the top schools, but I can't hold that against him because you and I are both we're both in education and we may have worked for some of the schools that he may have attended. I don't know, so we better not cover that ground, but. You know, he's famous for belonging to clubs such as the Bullingdon Club, which what's that other guy that Boris Johnson, also belonged to, and they're kind of the kind of people I don't like. That basically, I mean, the story goes that as one of the initiation ceremonies to be part of that club was you had to take a £50 note and burn it in front of a homeless person. And that doesn't really surprise me that that's the mentality of these kind of people. And I don't think, if you're ever capable of doing that kind of stuff, I don't think you ever completely grew out of it. There's a lot of other things that David Cameron has done, as well as, for example, he basically talked about people online who believe in conspiracy theories as being basically, he aligned them with extremists and terrorists and said we need to clamp down on them. So that's his way of thinking, basically. So that's why I can't stand him.
Well, I think that might be kind of a mainstream thing. I mean, in relation, I wouldn't go straight into the Bullingdon Club, but I think I would disagree with you in a couple of aspects there. One would be this is a specific UK issue surrounding education. This, I think, has been a smear directed to people at the right, that all the people on the right come from particular schools. But the point is that actually people from the left also come from these high schools. It's very, very difficult to find any left-wing politician that didn't go to a grammar school or a former grammar school. Jeremy Corbyn's, almost propaganda minister, Seamus Milner, went to Westminster. And he was part of all sorts of Maoist societies and things like this. So, I mean, I would say that that's a way of being influenced. I don't know about being part of the Bullingdon Club, but in the same way people who were part of a rugby club at my university played rugby naked with a frozen turkey one Christmas day. These are just sort of boyish expressions of exuberance.
The Bullingdon Club... The Bullingdon Club went way beyond that. I mean, the other famous story which somebody revealed in their book was where they took the severed head of a pig and they had to do sexual acts with it. And I think that goes beyond like kind of silly little schoolboy pranks, I think that's kind of like pretty vile, really. And
I don't think that claim was substantiated. I mean, I don't want to sort of stand up for David Cameron. My problems would definitely be with his policies, and some aspects of his personality, but not this. I think that this is a sort of mainstream smear, to be honest, and I would accuse you of falling hook, line, and sinker for these mainstream smears.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that's a mainstream smear at all. I mean, this was only revealed by some guy in his book. Can't remember his name. I wouldn't say. I would say what the mainstream does with a story like that, they don't really jump on it. It gets a little bit of time in the media, but then it's very quickly rubbished. and then
But
forgotten about. If the mainstream media, if they were more investigative, they would actually get to the bottom of that story. I reckon it was probably true, and they would publicise what the Bullingdon Club were really about and really go into it in depth. And it should have led to the downfall of David Cameron on that story alone. Some of the things that he's done, that should have been the end of him. But no, the mainstream they don't go far enough. That's my criticism of them.
There's a few things that I'll come out with and disagree there. One is the idea that a politician, from something they've done when they were 19 or whatever, should in any way affect whether they're able to do it. It should be based on their policy and their political acumen alone, rather than having a kind of offence archaeologist where you look back for tweets from 30 years ago, which is my problem with society.
Actually, can I just make a point? I agree with you about a tweet from 30 years ago, and certainly a one-off occurrence that isn't too serious, which society does jump on, or the mainstream media does jump on. This is actually a good point. They jump on meaningless tweets from 30 years ago and make them into big deals when the things David Cameron's done has been repetitive things over a long time. And part of the reason I wanted you to come on was because you disagree with me. I think it's good to have disagreement. So, I think disagreeing with each other is great, because who wants to agree with everything we say anyway?
Well, I don't want to stand here. I mean, I want to offer a differing perspective. I mean, you have that David Cameron wasn't perused far enough. I think that story in particular was perused quite far in the media. And one of the evidences of that is the fact that we're discussing it now, however many years afterwards. This was an unsubstantiated, anecdotal evidence of something that apparently came out at university that everyone was eager to sort of jump on.
No, that was the conclusion. That was the conclusion of the mainstream media, that it was unsubstantiated. So the mainstream media, they don't mind covering a scandalous story, but the media like the BBC like to turn that into a conclusion where it's an unsubstantiated story, when probably it really did happen. And
why do you say probably it really did happen? The person who wrote this had an axe to grind against David Cameron himself.
I think it probably did happen because of his character, because of David Cameron's character, and because of the Bullingdon Club and the type of people he hung out with, and because I don't think you'd make that story up. It's kind of, I just think you'd make a different kind of story up. It was kind of a quite specific
But what is it in about David Cameron's character that would suggest that he would do that? I mean, I don't think there is much evidence. I think it was a sideshow. I don't think this is actually anything to do with. And what's clear in this conversation is there's nothing in it about David Cameron's policies, and his policies weren't particularly by and of themselves conservative policies. A lot of them were very, very different, and this is why a lot of conservatives, even at the time, were very much against Cameron, because they felt he represented a kind of Blair light, a kind of slightly less left-wing version of left-wing mainstream politics, rather than being a realistic alternative. And I think that's sort of where we are at the moment. Is people desperately want an alternative to what in this country amounts to a kind of Blairism, a kind of nanny statism, the idea that the government can intervene on a varying plethora of sections, no matter how itemised, no matter how small, can solve all of these particular things, even though we have substantial evidence to the contrary, and no evidence comes across that the government can solve all these very, very complicated issues in education, in health, or in civil society.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Just to show you where I'm coming from politically. I can't stand almost 99.9% of politicians, and I haven't found the 0.1%. I'm trying to be optimistic there. I think I would be so happy if they completely disbanded all political parties in the UK and worldwide, and developed a new system of government where there's almost no interference in people's daily lives. It's just basically administrators that help get the basic things done, like the roads built and things like that, which basically the government have very little to do with anyway. Politicians spend a lot of time talking and very little time doing. We don't need them. They've become celebrities now. If you look at newspapers, even me and you are talking about them, they get too much airtime, you know. They should be ignored, and that you should barely hear about these people, but they've been elevated to star status, you know. Every single day in the newspaper, the headline story is going to be about Theresa May and people like that. You shouldn't hear about these people. So, yeah, I'm more of an anarchist, and even anarchy has some organisation behind it. But yeah, as little meddling as possible in people's lives.
Can I come in? I'm not entirely. You're right when we had the conversation about libertarian and anarchism earlier. I mean, I would define what you seem to suggest to me is a sort of more libertarian philosophy. Oddly enough, presumably you're not anarchist in the sense that you believe people should be allowed to commit crime. There is a point
that's actually not an anarchist belief. If you look at most definitions of anarchy, it's not that people should be allowed to commit crime.
Mm-hmm. So. In distinct here, what is the role of government?
The role of government is to basically be administrators. Even if you read the definition of anarchy, and I think people have been lied to a bit about that deliberately, or what anarchy is. It's basically just getting rid of the government, the most annoying parts of government. They're no longer stars. You won't hear about them in the newspapers. They're just there to do the administration jobs, you know. In fact, they don't actually need to get involved with much at all, the government. The roads get built by road workers. They have people in charge of them, supervisors. They have managers. Somebody needs to fund them. So it's basically, you know, people who the government would be controlled by the people, probably more locally. So it'd be broken down into a bit more locally, and you wouldn't have these huge central governments that make these big laws which are rolled out across countries, you know.
But it seems to me we have a lot of overlap then from what we think. You know, obviously I believe that too. May I ask then, since you've just made that point about overlap and big laws and stuff, what is your perspective on the EU?
Well, the EU, that's why I find it difficult to ask when people say, what do you think of Brexit? It's like, I hardly care, because it's like, do I want to belong to this much bigger form of government, or the other kind of government? It's like, well, neither. I don't, some of these things affect me personally, so as soon as the Brexit announcement was made, my money was worth less when I was travelling, so yeah, that was unfortunate. But really, I don't care. I don't want to be in Europe. I don't want to be in the UK government. I don't want to be controlled. Full stop. The only controls I want in society are as you mentioned, crime. If somebody kills someone, I want something done about it. I want them off the streets. Crime. I want the basic infrastructures of society to be built. You know, so people can have nice roads and can do the basic things they want. Not too much control, so people are responsible for their actions and suffer the consequences. It's a bit like free speech, really. I don't think there should be any control of speech. You can say what you like and deal with the consequences. That's all. So you can be racist. You can insult people, but if that person then wants to hit you, then so be it. That's the consequence. So that's how I think society should be run as well, like basic infrastructure and no rules, and there are consequences if you do things that society doesn't like, you know.
There are consequences if you do things that society doesn't like. I mean, in this instance, surely the person who assaults another person for you know, particularly abhorrent views, aren't they committing a crime then? Or is it only if...
Physical assault is a crime, so I think laws should be stripped right down. We've got too many laws now. I'll give you an example. And some of the smaller laws we have, they're perfectly reasonable laws. I understand them. I just don't think we ever needed them. For example, I think it's now in the UK illegal to smoke inside your car when there's children in the car. Now, I totally understand the rationale behind that. But I think that's gone way too far. The laws should be kept nice and simple. Don't assault people. Don't kill people. Treat others as you want to be treated. You know, basic laws. Not you're not allowed to smoke in a car with kids in it. That's gone way too far. That should be common sense. You know, and not actually a law. Especially and the dangers of those laws. I mean, if you look at countries like America. The amount of times now I've seen videos where someone's been breaking one of these smaller laws and ended up shot dead by the police because they didn't obey something whilst that law was enforced. You know, I think that's the danger of those smaller laws.
Yeah, well, also again, it inhibits your own personal freedom, which would be that it's your choice in which to smoke within your car, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and you know, I can totally understand. You shouldn't really be smoking inside a small confined space, and that's bad for your kids. But that comes down to maybe our next topic, which is education. We should be educating people better to be better people. The whole education system, I think, is ridiculous. Mostly, I mean, there's a small percentage of it that's useful. Learning a language, being able to read and write. But the rest of it is basically training people for the workplace. That's the way it seems to me. And also controlling people's minds to try and accept the official version of events and not to deviate from it. And we should be teaching people more life skills, like it's not good to smoke in small confined spaces. Smoke for your personal pleasure, but don't inflict it on your kids, basically.
Well, we'll take that as an example then, because it seems to me there is something to come out. So on the one hand, you're saying that we shouldn't teach people what to think, but how to think. I think is what you're saying. But at the same time, you're saying that we should teach children that they shouldn't smoke in a car with kids.
Teach adults, you mean?
Well, yeah, fine.
No, I don't think we should teach them. I don't think we should teach them specifically that, but teach people to be more considerate. Maybe would be better, or at least you can't really teach someone that. But I mean, encourage that aspect of or basically what I'm aiming at is teaching life skills rather than job skills. I mean, it's just pathetic that the whole of our education system is preparing you for the workplace. That should be almost a secondary thing. For me, work is just a means to pay the bills, basically. Why are we elevating that as the main motivation for school and education?
Well, I completely think the opposite, actually. I think too much of education is not linking the employment sector with the educational sector. I think that too much of it is namby-pamby life skills that make absolutely no sense.
Well, let's wait a moment, because I think the education I think the education system isn't teaching the kind of skills I'm talking about. So what do you mean by namby-pamby life skills?
Empathy training. I always, my ears peak up whenever I listen to something that says that education kills creativity, as if creativity is something that can be magically harnessed and children are these wonderful things. Ultimately, education should be about knowledge, and there is a kind of weird battle going on in education between the role of knowledge versus the role of skills. So it's in this idea of 21st century skills, which is somewhat, to me, I think it's a discredited idea, because you can't untie the relationship between skills and knowledge. So what a skill is many pieces of knowledge intertwined. So let's take your example of teaching children not to smoke in a confined space in a car.
No,
well, the education.
I didn't. I said making people more considerate, so that they would kind of frown upon the idea of inflicting smoke on their kids, the adults, You know, it's not really teaching them not to smoke in the car.
Well, that requires a knowledge. It requires knowledge of the harm smoking does. It requires a knowledge of rules already in place. It requires a strong social etiquette and environment, and a knowledge of community and relationships, and that being considerate to others actually benefits yourself at the end of the day, because you know, if you're going to be so inconsiderate that you smoke in a car in front of other people, it might be that they won't extend the same consideration or any consideration to you in future as you haven't to them.
Yeah, I would also you mentioned empathy training. That alarm bells would ring with that with myself as well. That sounds very namby-pamby, as you put it. That's kind of not what I mean. It would have to. It would take a lot of thought as to what this new curriculum would be that I'm talking about, but it wouldn't be empathy training. I don't think you can't really teach empathy. You have to do it in a different way, approach it from a different direction.
Well, it would surprise you really how much during my masters, for example, education in developing countries, that people would come up and, you know, there'd be sort of a serious conference and stuff, and we'd be talking about the global learning crisis. So, you know, this is basically that 250 million children out there are not learning to read or write a single word, not being able to do basic sums despite having 5 years of education. So they're in school, but they're not learning. Well, this happens
everywhere. I mean, you must have come across this in some of the teaching jobs you've done. I know I did in Japan, where I think it must be about 15 years they study English in school, and they come out at the end not being able to speak English. I mean, that's ridiculous. And I think it's a mistake, or maybe it's deliberate, you know, I don't know. It's the mistake that most countries are making with their government education.
This is to an entirely different extent, and I think language is a separate realm that we can discuss separately. But you're talking about not being able to read or write a word in their own language, or do a basic sum in their own language. And continually in conferences and stuff, people would say, well, you know, we need peace education. So you need education to train children to be peaceful, despite any evidence of that having any effect at all, what a peace circle is. Even if teachers in Chad or in a very, very poor country are able to enact or do this, even though it's complete contravention to any educational systems that have ever existed in these societies.
Yeah, I don't think peace training would work. People are kind of approaching it in the wrong way. I think if you want peace, the education system might be able to help, but you certainly can't train people to be peaceful. It's kind of stupid, yeah, but it could be approached from a different way. Someone would have to have a long think about it and think about what makes people behave in a peaceful way, and probably upbringing has something to do with it. So there's obviously some way that some families raise their kids to be a bit less aggressive, you know.
Well, I mean, what's the question here, and I think where we differ, because I'm far more of a traditionalist when it comes to education. As in, I would probably, you know, as strange as it sounds, believe in that Harry Potter style of education with a variety of different houses and traditions and songs and these types of things, and something heavily knowledge-based. I think where we differ is where we believe in the role of education. I don't believe any education has the capacity to do any of this. I think teachers these days, particularly in public education systems, are expected to be a psychological counsellor. The amount of times teachers now have to take it upon themselves to self-diagnose children with things like PTSD, stuff like that. They're meant to be moral arbiters creating a new society. They're meant to be peace builders upon which world peace is susceptible. They're meant to be, in Sub-Saharan Africa, builders of democracy and all of these things, all these different roles of teachers. And with each new role that you create for a teacher, less and less comes down to what is physically actually taught in the classroom.
Well, you mentioned knowledge there, and this is probably an area where we may differ. I mean, I only say may. I just think you have to define knowledge. For me, I think there's there's an idea in society that knowledge is learning facts, learning history, learning what's gone before, and I think that's not knowledge. I don't think it is. I think self-discovery is very important, and for all we know, most of history might be made up, and probably 50% of it is made up. So what's the point? There must be if someone could invent a time machine and go back and find out what the true history was 200 years ago, I bet they'd come back and find out that most of what we're teaching about it now is bullshit. So is there really anything to be gained by teaching somebody now facts and figures of something that happened 200 years ago when it's probably 50% wrong?
Well, I don't think we teach facts and figures of what happens 200 years ago. I think in terms of there's a few things there. One is, I don't personally believe most of the things we learn about the past is bullshit. I don't believe history is a useless discipline. I believe certainly you're right in the sense that we can never be 100% certain, but we can never be 100% certain of our own memories of events in the past and our own thing. I think that people need a logical narrative. They need to know things about the national identity, their world identity, why things are the way they are in the world, important aspects of these things are needed. And when you talk about they need to have particular skills, which is a popular thing, is that, well, the skills themselves require a certain amount of knowledge. How would you teach? It's the difference between times tables. Now, when I was younger, I was very fortunate in the sense my parents sat me down and made me memorize times tables, and I was very grateful to them. I needed that. We're not talking about adults here. We're not talking about the way you and I learn. We're talking about how young children learn. So the difference between getting them to memorize the times table or teaching them the conceptual elements behind multiplication as an initial starting point, before you teach them any of the prerequisite facts, as it were, behind answers. And I think mathematics is a useful field in this. I think different subjects are different things. But the thing is that as an initial starting point, you start with the basis of knowledge. And if I define knowledge, it would be items of learning. And by learning, I mean a change in your long-term memory. So you understand this. And even if you do think the past is bullshit, it is worthwhile having a narrative arc of events. I mean, one thing that always, destroys me is the hatred brought upon by the educational establishment in this country towards learning dates. I mean, dates are a wonderful thing. They really do give you a lot of information. And I think if you go into a museum and you see an artifact, it will give you, from carbon dating, an approximate time in which that object was. And if you look at the science behind it, it is relatively accurate. And
I would disagree there. I have had a guest on before. We talked about carbon dating, and there are some reputable people who've studied carbon dating and found it to be flawed. And I think the problem with carbon dating is there are assumptions made in the process of carbon dating. Certainly it might be accurate to a certain period of time, but nobody can actually say it's accurate, really, because you literally cannot. Let's say a carbon dating says a piece of wood is 2,000 years old. You can't actually go back 2,000 years and verify that the carbon dated that accurately. I mean, with wood it's a little bit easier because you can count the rings and there may be some facts behind that. But when you start going 5,000, 10,000 years back, it's making huge assumptions. Even carbon dating. I'm no expert on carbon dating, but I know it's to do with counting various things. But that does involve assumptions that it's always been that way, and that you can just keep counting backwards and then you arrive at your date. But you can't really. You're making an assumption.
It's quite imprecise, carbon dating, I think, and it does give us. And although, I mean, you're there and you're the one here wishing to arrive at a firm fact, and what you seem to be suggesting, Scott, is that if you can't exactly pinpoint the exact date of something with 100% certainty, then it's bullshit.
No, not quite. Not quite. I'm not saying that it has to be exact to the day. I'm saying you really have no idea. If you carbon date something that says it's 50,000 years old, sure, you can say, well, the carbon dating says it's 50,000 years old. But as far as I'm concerned, that's an assumption. There's absolutely no way to verify that. I'm sorry, there isn't. There's
no way of verifying that with fact, but you understand that it tells you more about that object than otherwise would have been the case. And it's not an assumption, it's a reasoned guess. And it becomes incumbent upon everyone in every given discipline to eventually settle down and say, well, I think this is particularly the reason this is the case. You can never be absolutely certain about it. But this is very, very technical, precise things. I mean, I think in general history, we can have a narrative. We can say with certainty, or with a relative degree of certainty. I mean, it depends. If you want to be a stickler for certainty, we can't particularly be certain of anything. That given events happened. And I think it is worthwhile teaching children these things in the realms of education. Even if you don't believe it's all bullshit, it's still worth doing it because it gives people the knowledge of what people perceive.
I agree with you there, Luke. I agree with you there. That there is some benefit from teaching people the history that everyone else is being taught. So, I mean, I studied history myself, so I do believe that I have gained some knowledge, so I know what I'm expected to think. So there is some value there for sure.
Well, I mean, let's say there is a big difference between, let's say, historical. I did history as well for my BA, and there is some value that I know. Things like, as I mentioned earlier, the Glorious Revolution and the French Revolution. Now, you might come around and say, well, actually, there's many contentious things about that. We don't know about this date. Maybe there's long-term causes for X, Y, and Z. However, there is a distinction between that and someone who goes, what's the French Revolution? I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, I would agree. So it's good to know what people are referring to. So I'd agree with you there. I would just say what happened in the French Revolution, and I did study it, but to be honest, it's a blur now. But I actually don't care that it's a blur because I think it's inconsequential, and that probably it's been heavily biased by the victors, as we all know. The people who are victorious write history, and I think that's a good phrase because I think there's a lot of truth in that.
Well, I mean, the French Revolution isn't a great example because presumably the revolutionaries themselves and Napoleon who overtook it, they were the vanquished, weren't they? However, people seem to be very positive about the French Revolution these days, and that it's very. But I mean, it's important for its significance and what people look to now and how it defines modern states. So,
yeah, well, I think it would be good then to teach history like this is what people perceive to be what happened, rather than teaching it as this is what happened. And I think that would be a slight adjustment, which would be quite beneficial. I think it would be beneficial on kids' minds. Like, this is what we've been told. We assume some of it's true. Here, receive this information. This is the date when such and such was supposed to have happened. Here, take away this information, learn it. I would say that we shouldn't judge people's intelligence by the ability to memorize those dates. I don't think that serves much purpose, because nowadays, if you ask me dates about the French Revolution, the Second World War, I'll type it into Google and I'll find out the perceived event and date that happened. It really has not much benefit of actually storing it inside your brain.
I think I disagree with that personally, but that's because I'm from a different. I mean, I actually think your view at the moment, Scott, is very, very establishment with regard to dates.
Oh no way, Luke, no way.
It is. Education hasn't been this way since the 60s, to be honest. In the 60s, the Plowden Report was decided in the UK, and that went down a more student-centered route.
I have to take issue with the idea that what I said was establishment, because it definitely isn't. The only way you get to be part of the establishment is to go through the education system, rise to the top, the only way you get to achieve in society, to get to the top in the business world, is to have gone through that education system, mostly. This isn't the case in all situations, and to be obedient, to get the top scores, to memorize the facts, and then to go up the levels. And that's the only way you look at our current UK Parliament. It's mostly full of people who've achieved academically.
There's quite a lot of Labour MPs who haven't particularly, and why? I mean, surely isn't that the purpose? I mean, that's what education is for. It's a signal, isn't it, that allows you to get into these things. And why shouldn't people who go to top universities in this country and who have achieved, good things and can clearly demonstrate that knowledge and be effective in their posts, be at the top? But that's the point. Issue.
That's the point we're discussing, though. The education system. You can't, on one hand, say there's big problems with the education system, and saying, look, they've got to the top of the education system. I'm saying the education system is just a way of controlling people's minds, and if you get to the top in the education system, all you've proved is that yes, you can memorize facts, and number two, you're a very obedient person, because in order to achieve in academics, you have to be 100% obedient and do exactly as you're told. Write essays in exactly the way you're told. Do it in the format you're told. Write the things you're told, and then you will achieve in academics.
Firstly, I don't think schooling is very much like that. I think some reforms have come in that have helped. However, I think there are a few issues there that I would bring up. One would be that firstly, knowledge isn't prized, and my issue with the education system at the moment is simply that it's not educating people enough, to be honest. I think the question would be, and many things come out about this, and I'm sure you balk at this, but many surveys come out about history undergraduates, who are going to study history at a prestigious university in the UK, and something like only 20% of them can say who the Queen was when the Armada came to England.
Good. Well, you know how I feel about the Royals, Luke.
Wait. Very few of them can say, who fought at the Battle of Agincourt. Very few of them can say when was the Battle of Hastings. But the question would be, Scott, at the end of that, if you think that's terrible, well, what do those children learn in its stead? If they don't know that, what do they know about history in its stead?
Well, that's a good question, Luke. And if I was going to revamp the entire history curriculum, I would need a bit of time to think about it. But I did agree. I did agree with you that it's worth knowing the perceived history that we've accumulated over the years. So I think all that's useful about learning is learning maybe what Agincourt was. When it happened, and even then I'm not sure. I mean, have we chosen? One thing I noticed about studying history was like there seems to be a certain periods of time and facts and figures that have been chosen as these are important. Why those particular ones? The Second World War. Events in the Second World War.
Well, it's because with the Second World War, it's because it is important.
No. When I said the Second World War, I was moving on to certain events in the Second World War. Right? I mean, the Second World War, we should learn, what happened there. We need to learn from our mistakes. I doubt that's what's. In fact, that could be one thing. We should be gearing people to learn about the Second World War so it can be avoided. Again, I don't think that's being focused on. We're learning about the Second World War as to what happened. Like, it should be, well, we should learn about the Second World War. Like, this should never happen again. Why did it happen? How can we stop that happening? I can quite easily see a Third World War happening. I see nothing in the education system, having gone through studying history. There was nothing there that made me think, now I don't want this to happen again. Society's changed so much now, it won't happen again. I see the same mistakes happening all the time. I fully expect a Third World War within the next 15 years.
Well, firstly, that would be nothing to do with education, and B, you're falling into the same trap as you're telling people what to think and not how to think.
No, I haven't.
Surely
What do you mean?
you
I'm not
should
telling
have
people how
faith
to
in
think.
people's rationality, that if they get garner the facts, they understand 20th century history and stuff. I mean, all of our education, so much of it is done not just with the Second World War, but more is geared towards the rise of Hitler. And if you look at any political conversations these days, they seem to be comparing nowadays with the 1930s. To me, a completely superfluous, ridiculous historical analogy. And the only reason they use it is because they know no other parts of history in which to do it, because it's been banged and done to death at their school. I think we study periods that are perfectly fine, but I think what it should be done, and it's the problem with history, is that it's become too rampantly politicized. I mean, this is a problem when you try and say, well, education should make people like this.
No, I don't mean education should make people like this at all. What I mean is, at the moment, where the way we're teaching history has a little benefit, I don't think, apart from what we've both agreed on, that it's good to know a rough idea of what people perceive to be the history. But I don't think it serves an awful lot of purpose. I was just merely saying, if we're going to teach history, it would be, this was just thinking off the top of my head, I think if someone wanted to really think about what we should teach about history, or even if we should teach history at all, that people should sit down and think about it a bit more. But I just think if you're going to have any emphasis, it should be on preventing wars in the future, not forcing people to think in a certain way. In fact, I'm totally against that. That's the whole point. I don't want to force anyone to do anything.
How would you design a history curriculum which would prevent wars in the future?
That would be a whole podcast in itself. It would take a lot of thought and
Well, my answer is you probably can't. It's probably best to teach people facts.
You may not be. You
allow
may not.
them the freedom of association to do as they wish and think as they please.
No. Yeah, but that's not what's taught. That's not what's taught at the moment, is it? Do you really think at the moment history is taught to make people think as they please? It's not taught like that at all.
I think it's taught in terms of garbage skills, historical skills that no one can barely define. They do the same periods to death over and over again in order to study exams. I think we should study history wider, more fact-based, more things to do with inquiry, going outside, visiting famous historical sites in the UK and learning about these things, and people understand their local history and how it connects to them.
I agree with going out. Any excuse to get out of the classroom, I would totally agree with that. Going to those places. When it comes to... I think introducing the idea, if I was teaching history, and I'm sure I would never be allowed to, if I was teaching history, I would introduce the idea that everything we're studying may not be true, and I would emphasize that quite a lot. That would be a nice change for me. At least these are just off the cuff ideas, but definitely encouraging kids not to believe their teachers. I think that would be a great move. No, but it's true. It's true.
Not to believe their teachers.
Yes, absolutely.
You're dealing with children ultimately. At the end of the day, when we start doing history, you have to present it in a sort of factual way. I mean, yeah, you can include these epithets of people think that, it is believed that, but ultimately, I think having a kind of, I think that you have an unhealthy skepticism in my view. But I believe you want to encourage a level of skepticism, which is fine. But the thing is, skepticism isn't a skill.
I wouldn't actually say I'm a skeptic. This is it's a weird word, yeah. I wouldn't say I'm a skeptic. Because, for example, to believe in conspiracies, you need to cast away skepticism. So you could say that's looking at it from another perspective. I'm not skeptical.
Well, I mean, you need a healthy... anyways, I think there is an idea of a healthy skepticism, and that can be encouraged. But the only way that people can be truly skeptical or useful is to know the information about something. And that's why, ultimately, I think the kind of things you're talking about, I might agree with for me and you now, because we're adults, but for children in school and stuff like that, it shouldn't be. I think towards the age of 15, 16, you can then come with more deliberation about various strands. I mean, here we're talking about history. That was largely
Luke,
the way I...
you know as an educator that the early years are the most important. So if there's important thinking process to help kids develop, you need to do it young. So I would say make them not skeptical. I would prefer the word open-minded, because I don't consider myself a skeptical person. I consider myself very open-minded. You need to consider all outcomes, and I think society at the moment teaches us, and this is where mainstream thinking comes, teaches us to think in a very, as David Icke would put it, in a very, very narrow frame set. So you think that everyone around you is making decisions, but actually they're not. They're sticking with the mainstream way of thinking, which is actually quite narrow. It's not open-minded at all. The BBC, if we can move on to media a little bit, is a fine example of this. A lot of people think the BBC are kind of unbiased. The BBC say they're unbiased, but I think they're heavily biased, and they're a good representation of mainstream thinking. What have you to say about the BBC?
Well, to move on from that, again, I think both of us have similar conclusions, but completely different ways of getting there. I think certainly, undoubtedly, the BBC claims, because it is publicly provided, obviously people pay their tax money into it, they are ostensibly supposed to be politically neutral. However, on a variety of different issues, particularly contentious issues, they present themselves as being not politically neutral and having a specific bias towards specific issues.
That's the thing, actually. I think in their effort to be so neutral, they've become incredibly biased.
Well, I think it's because I think there are certain... I think part of it is to do with political correctness, and I think part of the philosophy of political correctness is that there are views to which you automatically know the answer, and to which there doesn't even need to be any reasoned consideration of the issues or rationalizing around these issues. In fact, the answer's already been taken for given. And it's why that many articles, particularly in the BBC, about varying contentious issues, seem to be written in a sort of collective groupthink, by which it's impossible for them to even consider anyone else's opinion. So what you see is particular opinions being increasingly marginalized for this rather large monolith of opinion, by which, occasionally you see articles which are entirely nonsensical. I mean, they're entirely joke. And you can go on the BBC any day, as you and I do, and look at these articles, and you ask, well, why is this written like this?
Well, for example, I gave you an example at the beginning, before we went on air, which was about this female bodyguard. There's definitely a massive bias towards addressing the gender gap, which exists in society apparently. And when I say apparently, I'm being slightly provocative. I think there are probably some inequalities that need to be addressed, but I think it's been vamped way out of control regarding men and women. And this article is The Secret Life of a Female Bodyguard, and the sentence I gave you as an example earlier, which is typical BBC really, was, let me just find it. It's talking about how there's still only more women are now signing up to be bodyguards, though they still make up only 1 in 10 bodyguards in the UK. And the inference is that this is a tragedy, and it's those men again. They're controlling society. They're not letting women become bodyguards, when obviously there's an obvious reason why men tend to get attracted towards that role and are quite good at that role. Not saying that women can't do it, but there's a reason, right?
Well, certainly, absolutely. I mean, obviously, anyone's point would say, well, look, 9 out of 10 men are septic tank cleaners, it means nothing. As I said earlier, the expectancy is it should somehow magically be 50%. I mean, how many women would want to be bodyguards? It doesn't sound like a particularly nice thing. It might be that is actually probably better.
Yeah, and it's the BBC's attempt to be politically correct and say, look, we care about women. Every day you're going to read a story written by a woman, written about women, written about how women are overcoming adversity. It's going to be there every day because we care about women. That's the way I see their articles.
I mean, you're quite right, but it's like that regarding a variety of issues. The key, though, is that it's not actually the article in isolation. The article in isolation is perhaps ostensibly fine. It might be a general interest article. Oh, look, a woman bodyguard, and what's that like? That's what people might be interested in. However, it is the strange fact that comes in the middle of it, which is only 1 in 10 women are bodyguards. Now, it doesn't say anything. It's left to linger.
Exactly.
But it is a kind of covert agenda that's there. And then again, you're right. You can come on every single day and you'll see a carbon copy, cookie cutter, the exact same article, which will be, this woman is a flamethrower operator, and only 1 in 20 women are flamethrower operators for,
it's a
big flamethrower.
By the way, I'd like to point out that I do love all women out there, just any women listening, and I have to say this, Luke, because I believe you may be getting married soon, but I'm still single, so yes, I do love women. But carry on, Luke.
Well, no, but it's not even about that. I mean, this is part of this agenda as well, that if somehow you openly question, and part of political correctness, where the debates have already been decided, if you question it, you open yourself up to some sort of allegation that you might not, which is quite useless. I think the BBC has many other aspects to do with its politics. Things like things that come out. Brexit is notably one in which they're quite biased. Transgenderism and the cult of transgenderism, anti-privatised industries. These come out in BBC articles quite a lot. Immigration debates and issues regarding racism. Racism is another issue. You can say, well, there is a substantial problem in society. There are things that could be done, but sometimes are these things rather exacerbated, particularly in instances with many of these, issues of, I suppose, intersectionality, which is marginalised groups, and the treatment of this. There's many instances whereby these issues are quite complicated, and it's not in the way the BBC presents it. So in a sense, it's not about. I mean, these are typical articles, but in any article, you need to ask, well, why is this fact being mentioned here? Why is this article here? What exactly is the wording behind this article, and what haven't they considered?
I also think there seems to be a belief that media should never show emotion, should never give opinion. It's got to be unbiased. I think that's a mistake, and I think that's why maybe some people are being drawn towards alternative media, because they're sick of this kind of unemotional way of reporting. For example, on the MP child abuse scandal, the BBC, if they were just normal people without any bias, they should be investigating what the hell went on with that investigation, and why it was obviously it's just being covered up basically, and they're going to be allowed to get away with it. And instead they gently report things, and they're just a mouthpiece for the government. The government even write the BBC charter. I think the BBC is every bit as controlled as Russia Today, personally.
Well, I mean, I would disagree with you kind of completely. I think the problem is that the BBC. I mean, obviously there is this case where the BBC ostensibly appears to be neutral, but is in fact actually. I think the people within many media outlets see themselves as some kind of moral arbiter, or the better half of mankind, whereby if you say something that might be a fact, a good point is the child grooming scandal. The point would be, but how will other people use that fact? In this case, the implication being that, if people who are particularly racially minded and might commit awful abuse, but their job is to report the news. It's not particularly to tell people what to think or what the correct moral view is. Their articles are just merely an influencer of opinion, rather than reporting the actual key facts.
But,
I think
but
if you
what
can
happens?
do that,
What happens nowadays, and part of a problem with that way of reporting, is that literally now the government and the police and other institutions release news media broadcasts, and then that's literally just printed. That's all that happens. If the government want to say what happened about, for example, the Skripal poisoning, in Salisbury, they just say this is what happened, and then the BBC go okay, and they write it, and then there is no criticism, there's no critical thinking, there's no analysing or suggesting that perhaps this didn't happen. I mean, the most obvious, for example, with the Skripal poisoning, that chemical agent is probably it does exist about 6 miles away in the Porton Down laboratories. So the obvious question should be, did it come from that laboratory and not from Russia? That should be the first question, and that's never been the question, with any media with hardly any media outlets. So that's an example of how the media do not report anything. They just literally take it straight from the government's mouth.
Well, I mean, it depends what you mean by the media here. I mean, my problem would be actually the opposite. I think you can have an opinion piece, but the BBC don't do this, but many of the mainstream papers do.
But they do. That's the thing. That's why they're biased. They kind of heavily infer opinions. They let women.
I would agree.
I've seen articles. There was a recent article about how women don't get seen as quickly as men in hospitals. That was an opinion piece. That gets reported, no problem at all.
Yeah, and I mean also you can have suggested articles by the side, which is kind of interesting. One that was quite funny today that I saw was about Bert and Ernie from Sesame Street. Mm-hmm. Well, people are campaigning for them to come out as being gay and homosexual. Yeah, and underneath the Sesame Street spokesman for them said they are puppets, therefore they do not have any prescribed sexuality.
Yeah, good response.
But then you see all these other side pieces, and some of them might be about a person who's had homophobic abuse directed at them. This is a completely unrelated piece, but it's being advertised at the side, and it sort of presents a kind of particular view where you're being sort of nudged in a way. It's that economic notion of nudging people towards a sort of correct opinion without focusing on the issue at hand. So there is homophobia in society. So basically what it might tacitly be saying, well, there is homophobia in society. A solution to this might be make Bert and Ernie gay, admit lots of characters, then there will be less homophobia. None of these necessarily are proved. I don't necessarily believe that having more, that exposing children to homosexuality at an early age will somehow lead to a more tolerant society. I don't think it is unquestioned that those two are intrinsically linked. But yeah, it's the way the article is presented and how unreasoned. I remember actually recently, a while ago, I was discussing with my fiance, and she sent me an article. I don't know whether you heard about this, and it was this Australian sort of child therapist or whatever, and says that you should ask children their permission before you change their diaper or nappy.
Yes, I saw that.
And she said, "Oh, look how ridiculous this was." And it was an article from the Mirror, and I said to her, "I guarantee you, in a couple of days, the BBC are going to come out with an article and say, oh, is this is this opinion really that controversial?" And then give a justificatory article and a kind of an op-ed about why maybe it might be a good idea to ask children their permission before changing their nappies. And it, lo and behold, it actually came out in the BBC, this sort of pandering kind of piece, a kind of, I don't know, one of the back office staff who've done gender studies or something as part of their degree, wrote this opinion piece saying that, you know, arguing in terrible terms, in my view, why we should ask babies their permission for changing their nappies.
Yeah, I mean, stories like that do kind of annoy me, and just I guess they're supposed to be provocative, though. There was another one which the BBC jumped on as well, which was, are you prejudiced if you would not date a transgender person? And I was on Twitter at the time. It just annoyed me. I just tweeted back to them, "Of course you're not," and then I think I said something mildly abusive, but
well,
I just think you're not.
Dating there is by definition discriminatory. Every time you date, you're discriminating, aren't you, between what you find attractive and what you don't?
Yeah, exactly. In a way, yeah, you are discriminating, which is fine to discriminate because it's a choice.
Discrimination in its literal sense doesn't necessarily have to be positive nor negative. It's something that we do. It's something that humans biologically naturally
It's a preference, but I do fear that we may be becoming a society where in the future, 10 years from now, you could be seeing prison time because you refused to date a transgender. I honestly believe that we are going in that direction.
Yeah, no, I think there is a propensity here for more and more, you know, intervention into people's personal lives. And the problem is what is defined. I mean, this, there are so many elements, I think, about particularly, I think transgenderism is an interesting issue because it's something that's just exploded in the past 10 years or so to be a really, really, you know, just a sort of ground zero, I think, of many of these debates and these different visions throughout society of where people are living, and now there is such a hysteria among activists for this. It is quite clear that legislation like this can and probably will be considered.
It's already causing issues. I mean, not just the transgender issue, but the gender issue. I think there's now a list I saw the other day of more than... every time I say a number, it's got larger, so I'll just say it was 60, but it's probably 100 now. Different types of gender, and that you should be able to identify as one of these genders, and people should respect you and respect your pronouns. I mean, my personal opinion is that's got out of control, and I'll just call people him, her, because it's simple for me, to be honest. I'm not gonna pander to your demands if you want me to call me by some specific pronoun, and I do think that can be a problem because already we've seen in education that teachers are having problems if they refuse to use the preferred pronoun. People are going to start losing their jobs over this.
I think some people have. I remember one secondary school person who was at an all-girls school, actually. He said, "Well done, girls," in a class. And two of them didn't identify as being girls, so they complained about him, and he lost his position. I'll try and get that.
I think that's right.
That was a notable issue.
And now there's issues over calling. I think it'll be illegal to have an all-girls school and an all-boys school in the future. I mean, Cub Scouts has now opened up to girls. It's kind of almost doesn't really matter, but it's kind of stupid at the same time. Society.
Well, it doesn't. You understand, it doesn't particularly matter to you and me, but this comes. This is having great trouble actually on the left itself with the difference between radical feminists and trans activists at the moment, because obviously, if a woman who identifies as a man comes into a bathroom, you and I won't care. We don't particularly. I wouldn't care at all. I'd just go about my business. Or if I was in a changing room with this person, I think that was weird, and I wouldn't care. But if you're a woman and a person with a beard who hasn't done any operation or anything like that comes into a female changing room because they ostensibly identify as being a female, that represents more of a threat to you, perhaps, or you might find it more threatening, maybe. And in cases like that, if you allow anyone to go into any changing room they wish or any school they wish, it will be open to kind of abuses. Have you heard about Ian Huntley?
For the Soham murderer?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I obviously know him from what happened those years ago when he allegedly murdered the two girls.
Well, he was convicted.
He was convicted. I say allegedly because I'm careful these days because, you know, being a conspiracy theorist, I can never say for sure. But yeah, it seems like he was the guy. But yeah, what about him anyway?
He's identifying as a woman now and wants to move to an all-female prison.
Oh yeah, I think I did hear that. Yeah, that's a bit odd. Very odd, actually. I find there's a couple of stories like this that, you know, it seems like Bradley Manning, the guy that released that video to WikiLeaks, he turned into a woman. Ian Huntley, yeah, that seems a bit odd to me.
Well, it's a real complex issue, I think, but I think that a lot of disciplines, I have negatively referred to it, but disciplines such as gender studies, to my mind, has no real academic credentials. And I think these kind of things coming out at the moment are very trendy. It seems to me that it's you know, changing the... I mean, you're sort of taking all of humanity and human biology and turning it on its head if you say that gender is a social construct. I don't think you can particularly even argue that factually. It's argued in sort of very dense philosophical terms that sort of don't at all actually reflect what the majority of people and how the majority of people view their life. And I think even if you desperately attempt radically by forcing people to use pronouns, which I think is a ridiculous issue. I mean, how many times do I refer to you by pronoun? Scott, how many times do I refer to you
Maybe when you're gossiping about me behind my back, Luke.
Maybe. But then how would you know about it? You wouldn't know, so who cares?
Yeah, but if you do, I'd like you to use me to refer to me by the correct pronoun, please.
Okay, sir. But like, it's a very complex, dense issue. For me, I'm not convinced by many of these arguments, but because they exist in such a hermetic discipline as gender studies. I mean, let's take it, if you're studying gender studies, you're not going to hear about many contravening opinions to that. It is basically a kind of indoctrination course for how far it is.
Well, education itself is indoctrination.
Well, at least in some of them, you're going to be, you know, at least with some other disciplines, you're at least going to hear countervailing perspectives. You're not just taught one thing and told like it or lump it.
Well, no, I mean, you know, to be fair, you're taught the three things that you must like or lump. You're taught the three official versions of events that you're supposed to like. That, I don't think they give you an awful lot of choice.
Surely there is a distinction between that and what I'm referring to with courses, with certain degree courses at the moment. I think general education is fine, but I think at universities, they are literally indoctrination centres where you are being forced into the radical perception of your professors.
Oh, I would say it goes into much younger than that. I think people are being indoctrinated from play school, Luke. I think even when even those building bricks and balls you're given, they're probably indoctrinating you somehow.
Well, I look forward to hearing your remedy for any of this.
But definitely in infant school and junior school, total indoctrination. It's just preparing you.
I would like to hear your remedy for this and how one can't be other than to tell them to not trust your teacher.
Oh, there's loads of things. Seriously, if you put me in charge of the education system, I would make some radical reforms. But it'd be I tell you, the reforms that I would make would be hated by a lot. It would be hated by a large part of society, because society has become brainwashed in itself. I think that at least I'm being generous when I say 60% of society. I think the figure's probably much higher. Are completely indoctrinated, have a mainstream way of thinking, and but I don't entirely blame it on them. I blame it on the education system. It's reared people in a certain way to become almost like zombies. I wanted to ask you though, where we probably don't have too much time left, but one thing I've looked at or been thinking about recently is critical thinking. I see people talking about it on various different people, and what is critical thinking to you, Luke?
Well, critical thinking, I think, is absolute kind of. It depends. There's two ways. There's my own personal version and the way it's been used recently. I think to think critically about something is to genuinely use your reason and rationality in order to view something within its given context, and to arrive at a rational conclusion for that. The kind of things we were talking about earlier about historical skills in history, assessing bias, these are all relevant to critical thinking. However, as a caveat, I would say that it is impossible to think critically without having the prerequisite knowledge in which to do it. I don't think you can teach critical thinking at all. I think any attempts in which to do so are silly. I think the way you learn critical thinking is through experience and knowledge.
I think you can teach it a little, only a little though. Because I've tried to teach it actually. Because I think there are a certain amount of people who, when presented with a fact, just believe it. That's a sad fact of society. I think they just believe it. So I think you can teach a little bit of critical thinking by saying, try this process of thought. When you see a fact, ask yourself a couple of questions. Actually, the BBC did a little something similar to what I'm suggesting, but in BBC style. To spot fake news, you should ask yourself these questions. And after asking yourself these questions, basically, it basically boiled down to, if it wasn't from the BBC or CNN, it was fake. Yeah. So you have to be careful of critical thinking, or any processes really. But I think just a couple of questions would. Ask yourself a couple of questions before accepting something is a good way to go.
Well, I mean, I think a good way for me, to be honest, a good way for me is having prerequisite knowledge enables your critical thinking capacity. I'm not a person who, I think I think I can assess knowledge. I don't necessarily think, I think it's impossible to treat people. I think at some level you have to have faith. If you have, for example, a historical work that tells you a specific event happened on a specific day, has correctly sourced that to a primary source, just because you haven't seen the document, you can take a kind of leap of faith, and there are differences between certain people being correct in their judgment of facts over others. So, for example, I would believe a statistic presented by the government in a report, partly because you can confirm with those reports. I would certainly believe that over, I don't know, a child telling me something about the world. I think there are differences within that, and I think learning these things can be a means to critical thought. I mean, I'd say, look, a good example of this might be earlier on this year. I think my master's course became basically a means of indoctrinating us. I think we were being taught to view education through a post-colonial lens, which has no meaning in reality. And I remember we were presented with a paper here, and it contained several absolute glaring historical inaccuracies that hadn't even been considered, and it was my ability and knowledge of the colonial period, not even self-aggrandizing it, but knowledge that this really was excessive. This was sort of taking the piss. And it didn't really validate with any of my experiences in Sudan. These were the things that enabled me, the knowledge itself enabled me to view it in a more critical light and to view it as a source rather than just unquestionably accepting it, as my peers had done.
I would say if you used some experience in Sudan, then yes, that would be a great way to critically analyze it. But using previous knowledge of new knowledge, I would say is a bit suspect, because you don't really know
What's
what the
point
previous.
of learning anything then?
Well, that's my point. That's my point, Luke. There is very little point.
Why would you bother even using your computer, Scott? You don't know whether that's fake.
I can play games on it. It
fake.
takes photographs, and I can talk to you on it, Luke. Now, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation without my computer.
But it sounds to me that, yeah, but there's a distinction then here made between hard sciences, where we can be more certain of what it is because we can clearly prove.
Now I'm so glad you said that, because that was the final point I wanted to talk about today. Hard sciences. I have been critical of science, and there's a good reason for it, and I'm not really going to back down on it, really. I think science has gone out of control, and it's teaching a lot of things as facts when it's just speculation. Would you say it's reasonable for science to tell us what the surface layers of Saturn are made of, Luke?
Well, I mean, I'm not particularly scientifically minded, but from what I understand, I won't address the surface layers of Saturn per se, but I think there is. I think you are aware of the scientific method, aren't you?
Of course I'm aware. I think the scientific method is not used by science. But in a lot of ways, it's not used today in science. For example, let's talk about something which you may even think is ridiculous, but I'm going to say it anyway. I have been talking to the flat earthers recently, so it may have influenced me somewhat. But the flat earthers will say, how do we know what, you see these diagrams of our own Earth showing the inner core, and they show all the levels, it's all mapped out, how far down everything is. But we've only ever drilled 8 miles into the Earth, around 8 or 9 miles into the Earth. So it's entirely speculation, guesswork, theory, mathematics. It's not actually based on reality, and I think we should start thinking in that way a lot more. We should learn something from the flat earthers, and it just annoys me when science tells us this, what the surface of Saturn, what's under the surface of Saturn, and what lies in the seas in certain planets, and even talking about distant planets is ridiculous. It's not verifiable, it's not checkable, it's not testable. That's supposed to be the principles of science, and none of it's being done.
So what would be an example for you that is verifiable or testable? Because I believe scientists would say these things are.
No, they're not, though. They're not verifiable and observable. We can't, even talking about stars that are so many billions and trillions of light years away, that's not verifiable, that's not observable. We can use processes which can make an assumption and tell you what you think, how far away you think these things are, and what they consist of. But it's not verifiable, it's not testable, and it's not observable. So it's all assumptions. Science is doing this all the time and teaching it as fact. Evolution now is virtually taught as fact. I completely disagree with it. Millions of people do. I think there was a certain amount of evolution, but I think that to say I was once a fish or descended from a fish, I disagree. And science will tell you, no, this is all the evidence tells us. I think that's bullshit, basically. It's just they're trying to make theories into facts instead of looking for more theories, basically.
Well, unfortunately, I don't think. I mean, I am probably an example of a sheeple that does believe in evolution and
you bloody
these
sheeple.
Things. Huh?
I said you bloody sheeple. I was just.
Yeah, exactly. I probably am.
I never use the words. I very rarely use these truther phrases like sheeple and have you woken up yet. I'm not one of those. I don't use these phrases.
It was a joke, but yeah. I think that I think if you look into it, many of these scientific principles are more have been somewhat attested to. I think you're right.
That's the thing. They haven't, and this is where education has failed colossally. Were you ever taught at school, Luke? This is a serious question. I already know the answer. Were you ever taught at school why and how water bends over the earth? Like why? At what distance can water bend over the spherical earth? So, like, you know, we have oceans that are miles and miles and miles of oceans that are on a curve. We all know water, you know, on a curve. If you put water on a curve, if you observe it on a curve in a small space, it's all going to run off to either side, right? But we weren't even taught at school why at what distance can an ocean start curving. We were never taught that, you know, why that happens, the distances, and you know, we're not actually taught much about our Earth and the world we're supposed to live in at all.
Well, it's been so long, and I found science so boring. I can't say that I particularly.
The thing is that they don't teach it to anyone. They don't teach it to anyone. So the flat earthers have got a point, basically. Why are they not discussing that at all? Like, surely it's quite important, because we know observably the water doesn't curve over balls. So why were we never taught why it curves over the earth? It's quite important. It's where we live, right?
What? I'm not entirely certainly sure about this. I mean, I'm not a flat earther. I think I think in my view there is enough evidence from looking at other planets which are round.
I'm not a flat earther either, by the way, but I do love their way of thinking. I think that's the way of thinking we should be heading for. Instead of mocking them, they're completely on point. They are saying, look, we need to work things out for ourselves. Don't trust scientists from 100 years ago. Why would you trust these people that lived in a time when we didn't have much information and technology, but we're basing our entire knowledge on that?
Again, why would you trust any technology that someone developed from another time when we weren't here? I mean, that's what the spun of human history is. We develop upon theories and things that we've learned from the past. And,
no, we should be expanding on the theories. We're listening to Charles
Darwin. Are you saying anyone that sort of comes about in future should disregard any previous knowledge that was in the past and begin anew from first step?
I think we should be, instead of focusing on the theory of evolution, all scientists trying to prove it's correct, scientists should be spending all their time trying to disprove the theory of evolution, coming up with new ideas as well, and trying to prove them. That's where science is making a mistake.
Method. That is part of the science.
No, it's not. That's part of the way the scientific method is supposed to be. It's not the way it's happening. No, very few scientists are going out there to disprove the theory of evolution. They're all trying to prove it's true.
I mean, well, from my understanding, and I don't know enough, and obviously I don't look into theories that attempt to disprove evolution, partly because to me it makes a lot of sense.
You were descended from a fish, Luke. Your great. I'll say that as into infinity, and that would be the end of the podcast. But to save time, just times that by 10 trillion. Great grandmother was a fish. That's what you believe, Luke. And that's fine, but I think people shouldn't mock people with opposing views, because that's what you believe. Your great, again, times a trillion, grandmother was a fish. That's what you believe. Right?
I think that's a bit of a straw man argument.
No, that's a fact. That is a fact. That is a fact. Luke, that is a fact of believing in evolution. And like I said, there's no problem, but people do not have the right to mock people with opposing views if they believe they were descended from a fish.
that's absolutely. I mean, again, no one. I think that flat earthers and people who are against evolution are perfectly open and perfectly free to have their opinions about it. That's absolutely fine.
Flat earthers don't tend to talk too much about evolution. That was just me throwing that. That was another concept.
No, but people who doubt evolution and flat earthers are perfectly free and valid to have an opinion. I think the only way such opinion is sustainable, to be honest, is that if you have a propensity and a view you have, which is a mistrust of ways in which we come to knowledge, a profound mistrust, it is that there is the danger that you can always misshape anything to your own particular views, because if something unhappy comes about, in the flat earth example, if something unhappily comes about, like someone takes an image from the International Space Station, they will turn around and say, oh, well, that's just ridiculous, that's ludicrous. This is just fake. This is the fake government doing their fake thing.
Yeah, true. I agree. I actually agree with you.
If you use that logic, you can just disregard anything, and there's no means of proving anything. Really.
No, I agree. I agree with you on that. This is why I love the flat earthers. I think their way of thinking is exactly where we should be wanting people to be heading. But yeah, no, just dismissing everything. Although I think most people's the good point they have made is that most people only think we live on a globe because of NASA, basically. So that's why they tend to attack the photos and things. And there are some valid reasons. But another good point they bring up, and I bring this up mostly just to highlight what I'm talking about regarding education, is do you believe okay, what if I said to you the sun, I actually believed this before I spoke to the flat earthers, that we don't know how far away the sun is, basically. If I said to you the sun is 3,000 miles away, which some flat earthers believe, I don't think that's a laughable idea. I think, why not? We have no way of knowing. It's been calculated. It was calculated a long time ago using a method which is also involves assumption, and it's just stuck with us ever since. It's been reevaluated a little bit, but unless NASA are completely telling the truth about everything, we don't know how far away the sun is, and most people will accept the official version of how far away the sun is. But why? Why aren't we out there teaching kids to go out there doing experiments to calculate how far away the sun is, and at least to be involved in the process,
I must admit no to most of that, in my view, because the distance of to walk from the Earth from the sun are made of measurements, and it's made from very ancient times. I mean, let's take another example.
That's the point. That's the point, Luke.
Wait. Let's take another example then. Because, I mean, this, I think, is just charlatanism, in my view. Because, for example, Thales of Miletus was an ancient philosopher, and he successfully predicted when the sun would have an eclipse.
Yeah.
Now, surely that is a piece of knowledge, because it was proven by the fact that he successfully predicted it, and proved that at certain times the moon obstructs the view of the sun, and there would be a solar eclipse at that time. And other times, lunar eclipse had happened. These are presumably pieces of knowledge that you would accept because they can be obviously proved, because the theory can be proved every single month or few years whenever there's a lunar or solar eclipse.
The flat earthers have something to say about that. I'm not going to go into it because I don't know enough to talk about it. But
they probably just come up and just, because they're arguing from a basis that I disagree with, which is they can just disregard anything they don't particularly like to hear.
Not all of them. Not all of them. I would say. One point I want to make about the flat earthers is they are way more intelligent, and their thought process, this is the point I want to make, their thought process and their intelligence is way more than the person on the street. This is the point I think should be is the main point, basically. If you drag someone off the street and say, maybe the sun's 3,000 miles away, they're just going to start laughing, say you're ridiculous. And then you'd probably have to show them on Google how far away the official version is. Then they'll say, yes, I agree with that one, because 3,000 miles is ridiculous. There's actually no thought process gone on in that at all. There's no thought process at all. The flat earthers will be able to tell you all about the accepted view of the solar system, what science tells us about everything. They're far, far more knowledgeable about the planet we live on. So that's the point. They know a lot more, and yet some dumb person off the street knows nothing, but will mock them, and they have none of the knowledge.
You've said mocking a lot, but I mean, obviously this isn't about mocking. If you take people's particular views and do it, it's rather separate.
No, the mocking. What I mean by mocking is people with no knowledge mocking people with all the knowledge. That's what's stupid.
Well, there are many mainstream scientists as well, or scientists, famous
Brian
scientists.
Cox recently.
Neil deGrasse Tyson as well.
Yeah. Brian Cox recently was presented with the idea that we didn't land on the moon. I did an episode about that recently. That's a perfectly valid question to ask, whether we landed on the moon. It's completely valid. Instead, he just mocked it. He was also did the same about the flat Earth.
But wait a sec. Look, I think it's best, rather than jumping the gun around here, because obviously I'm not up to speed with these kind of things. But I want to focus on that. Why is it valid to ask the question, did we land on the moon?
Okay, that's a good question. That's a good question. It's a valid question to ask. Number one, I would say it's valid to ask almost any question. You should be asking questions.
Really?
Yeah,
so it's
within reason.
What is that reason then, Scott?
Well,
because everyone has that reason, but it's a bit different.
It's a bit of a waste of time to ask whether this pen in my hand is a pen. It's a bit of a waste of time.
Why? What makes that different between...
There's not much point. It's kind of pretty worthless. The implications are worthless. It's kind of a boring...
So it's the potential value of asking the question, is that it?
I think if there's some potential... If there's any potential value...
What about if I asked you a question which would be, does the BBC exist? I don't know, does the Queen exist? I mean, I've never seen her. I can never be verified.
Oh, okay, I can settle that. I have seen her. Yes, she does exist. There you
go.
But
I don't know. I don't know if you're telling me the truth. I don't believe you.
Right.
In which case, you don't know any of that.
In which case, I would say that's an almost valid question, but you can quickly...
It's not a valid question at all.
It's absolutely a valid question, but it doesn't have... I wouldn't say it's a great one. You need to do better, Luke, because you can find out yourself. But it's a valid question, yeah.
All I am attempting to demonstrate is that, you know, the point is that there is a point upon which things become commonly accepted, and outside of that...
Yes, I would agree with you there, and my example was, am I holding a pen? Yeah.
But you can't complain when certain questions become sort of pseudo-conspiracies because they lay outside of people's main expectation. Now, these things might be proved right occasionally in time, that they tend to be proved right. You mentioned you want to sort of Catholic Church. I mean, Catholic priests abusing children was for a long time a kind of pseudo-conspiracy theory, and then was proved correct after a long period of time. But the thing is there is obviously a point where people will be allowed to pour scorn on what are perceived to be intractable truths within society.
Absolutely. There is a limit. I would agree with you there. So let me reverse the question to you. Why isn't it acceptable to ask whether we landed on the moon in 1969?
I didn't say it wasn't.
Okay, good. Well, so... can you think of a reason why it wouldn't be an acceptable question?
It depends where it is. It's not obviously, but it's also acceptable for Brian Cox to treat it sort of contemptibly.
Not really, not as a scientist, as somebody who should be questioning. He should be scientists should be the most questioning amongst us. Why am I more questioning than Brian Cox? I'm not a scientist.
Well, because presumably in his view, the situation has been settled, that he might be forced on other reasons and stuff. I don't see why he should come over.
His only evidence that we land on the moon in 1969 is the same as mine. I was told in a, I've seen some very grainy video. But I think it's perfectly acceptable, especially since we're now in the year 2018. And in 1969, we managed to go to the moon like it was a day trip. We literally went there 4 times, more than 4 times, I believe, over the space of a few years. It was an easy trip to make, apparently. And yet, with all today's technology, we are unable to do it. And the next projection is probably not for another 10 years at least. So it's a valid question to say, wait a minute, did they lie to us in 69? I think it's a totally valid question. I could give you lots and lots of more reasons.
Wait, there's other aspects of this conversation. I mean, sure, firstly, we needed to define what exactly a valid question is. A valid question open for public debate, or what?
Well, I think we don't really need to define what's a valid question, but I'll give you a quick stab.
Well, I mean, it depends what you're on about. I mean, any question's valid. Saying, is this a pen? That seems valid. Some philosophers would tell you that's a valid question.
yeah, okay.
They would. No, they'd say, well, is this a chair? Where does it become a chair and where does it become a stool?
Well, I would agree that any question is valid, but there's definitely a spectrum. I would say you're wasting your time.
You mean valid and open for public debate and stuff. I see that there is absolutely no problem that people believe we went to the moon in 1969.
There's no problem that they believe it. There's also no problem that they.
I would like to say that I believe that.
Every year that goes by from now, I'm going to believe it less, because I think it's getting to a ridiculous stage now. Especially after, if you analyze lots and lots and lots of things, you can quite easily come to the conclusion. Especially for me, the timescale is getting stupid now. It should be a breeze. Technology has moved on so much since '69. It's just in '69, yeah. I mean, people often use the fact that the computer capacity was about the same as a mobile phone. The whole of NASA had about the same processing power as a mobile phone, or even less, I think. But we managed to go ridiculous distances. I can't remember. It's 186,000 miles, something like that, maybe more. But now we can't get further than a couple of 100 miles. Or maybe 400 miles. We can't go any further, and yet in '69 it was like a day trip. We were going there so often. But now you can't even talk about it without talking about it happening decades from now. It's definitely a valid question to ask. Did they lie in '69? They are a military organization, and who was the head of NASA? Around that time, it was a Nazi.
Well, no, I mean okay. The conversation is not about whether we landed on the moon. I mean, obviously you have a very specific interest in this. The key is what is this a valid question to open up to or not? I think that in an educational sense and in a societal sense, we don't need to argue whether the Earth is round or whether we landed on the moon.
When it comes to the Earth being round, I don't think we need to argue, but I think it's on the one hand, it's actually a good question for kids to ask and to find out the proof for themselves, because very few kids do that, and I think the good point that the flat earthers bring up, if nothing else, it's a very good academic exercise. Because if you look into it, you realise, actually, I don't even know for sure I do live on a globe. The only way I know is NASA, basically.
Well, that might be a fair point for children, maybe.
It's a fair point for adults.
Then again, why do we need to argue that the Earth is round?
We don't need to argue.
I'm going to come up with this and say that I'm not that minded. I'm not scientifically minded. I don't really care how things work. They can just work. I care more about ideas, forms of expression, and using these things that work in order to come up with coherent theories, opinions, things like this. I'm not scientifically particularly minded like that. So for me, you don't have to be able to explain in every single way why something is the case is, because it's almost impossible. It's impossible for me to explain what Einstein theory are. But I know from his work on the Manhattan Project and things like this that you know, they are somewhat successful, and there is an element of credibility in this you know, in physics. Some of this is very complicated, dense, difficult stuff.
Okay,
but,
Luke,
yeah.
here's an idea for you. What if it isn't? What if it's complete and utter nonsense?
How do you mean by complete and utter nonsense?
What if
That someone just made it up one day, or that?
No, what if somebody like the late Stephen Hawking's, everything he said was complete and utter nonsense? It was, but there is no mathematics to describe anything he was talking about, or if at best it's just mathematics, it has no relation to reality at all. There's no such
mathematics have a relation to
There's
reality.
no such thing as black holes, for example. They don't exist.
Mathematics have a relation to reality.
Well,
and
theoretically they do.
Those
Theoretically,
things are eventually verifiable. I mean, science is a process, I suppose.
I would say I don't believe in black holes. I don't think they even exist. I don't think they exist at all. I think some of these people are a kind of almost like crazed madmen. Stephen Hawking's. I propose to you, Luke, that he was just a complete madman. He couldn't quite how he wrote his book. I do not know, because he was literally able to blink, and so it must have taken him ages to write a book. So possibly he didn't even write it; someone else did. But what if these mathematical theories are just the mathematical numbers of a complete madman? They have no relation to reality. Black holes do not exist. And I think scientifically, surely they should be verifiable, testable, and observable. Nobody's observed a black hole. They don't exist.
Again, you're taking specific things and otherwise. It's not a madman. It would be certainly a mad men and women, I suppose, since the dawn of history up to now, for all of these mathematical theorem not to be the case. I mean, surely gravity is something that you can observe yourself if you want. You can jump out your window and have a look at that.
That's an interesting thing, because gravity is just a word, right? It's still a theory, by the way, the theory of gravity. Actually, scientists do not know what it is. They have no idea. So when you say, if you say to someone, do you believe in gravity? Most people think, well, do you mean if I drop an apple, will it fall to the floor? Of course, everybody believes that because they can observe it, but that is not what gravity is. That's not what gravity means. That's just a word to describe an apple falling to the floor. So, do I believe in gravity? I have no idea.
No,
it's still a theory.
The description of the force of the object attracting you towards it.
It's a mysterious force which scientists have no...
mysterious force. It's if we're... And then, well, anyways, I'm not getting into these scientific arguments, because I know very... again...
The thing is, you don't need to know a lot about... you don't need to know much science, have much scientific knowledge to discuss them. So, for example, a butterfly can fly upwards, and the gravity holds the oceans, tons and tons of water, to the surface of the Earth. It stops you from jumping upwards, but a butterfly can fly against it. So it's an incredibly weak force, but powerful force at the same time. But scientists have no idea what it is. They've just called this situation gravity. That's all.
Isn't that the same with everything? You always make up a name for something.
Yeah, but that's kind of doesn't mean a lot. So what scientists have done is talked about phenomenon and then given it a name.
If you're taking that definition, does any name mean a lot at all?
Some names, I think, mean things. So if we think of another process that's got a name that we understand and can observe, let's talk about I don't know, the process of punching someone. We call it a punch, and I can observe it. I throw my fist forward, it hits someone in the face. I've observed that, and it's called a punch, and I understand what it does. But gravity is just a name.
Are you threatening me, Scott?
Yes, that was a veiled. That was a veiled threat, Luke.
Okay, you've convinced me evolution doesn't exist.
No. I am. When we have these discussions, I am talking about the process. A lot of the thought process. This is why I love the current flat Earth way of thinking. I think everyone should get behind them. I think it's fantastic. I don't know why they're being mocked by some people. They're far more intelligent than most people, and the way they're thinking is the way I would like to see education at school. I would love it if my kid came running home from school and said, "I don't believe we live on a sphere." I would think, "That's my boy, fantastic." Because you want people to be questioning big concepts and trying to work things out for themselves. I would at least want my son then to I would say to him, like, right, fine, good. Now, can you try to find out what you are living on then, and why you're not living on a sphere? So it's important, I think, the thought process. What is not good is that people are reading something in a book and then saying, "I am intelligent now. I read that and I know that as knowledge." That's not knowledge at all.
So what is knowledge in your view?
It's a good question. It's hard to define, but I'll go back to what I just said about the flat earthers and the way their thinking process. Knowledge is
denying every knowledge all the time.
It's either discovering yourself something completely afresh, or being presented with an idea, criticizing it, or at least looking at the evidence for that idea, and then if you can't see the evidence, as you can't really, or if you're presented with a photograph, that's not good enough these days. Photographic evidence is not good enough these days. They can be doctored. So we can dismiss photos and videos.
No. You can't just dismiss all of photos because it might be possible for them to be doctored.
You don't need to dismiss them entirely, but they're only a piece of evidence in the jigsaw. They're not.
They're not a piece of evidence. I mean, of course. I mean, you don't. I mean, obviously, it's kind of, but you can't just dismiss it entirely.
No, I didn't say that though. If I said, look, Luke, today I jumped 10 meters in the air today, and then I presented you with a photo of me hovering 10 meters in the air, would that be good enough for you?
What do you mean good enough for me? I mean, if you give an actual story in the newspaper, or otherwise,
I was giving you a hypothetical situation. Doctored. The point is, you would look at it and think, you would look at the photo and think, does it look real? Okay, that's exhibit number 1. Now you would probably say, now I want to see you do that in person now. Okay, so you'd want to observe it, right?
Presumably, in this instance, yes.
So the photo meant something, but it didn't hold a lot of weight. You want to see it happen, and so that's why I don't think photos hold. They're not definitive, you know.
A photo is not definitive in proving something. Yes. Okay.
Now, just to quickly let you know a little bit about the flat Earth reasons why they don't believe the photos is because NASA released a series of photos of the Earth over decades, and they're all different. They look completely different, and there's problems with them. They've even admitted that they're photoshopped. They're not actual photos of the Earth, but they presented them initially as photos of the Earth. So that there are some problems, with what they've presented. Basically, they actually used. You can actually see they've used Photoshop to make clouds.
May I ask about the flat earthers? Why do they think that people want to misinform people that the Earth is round? Why have these photos been doctored?
Right. Well, the reasons, the motivation is basically that we live on a flat Earth, and there is an agenda to make people think that we live in a big universe and we're just a small speck, and there could be other universes, there could be other planets, and we're kind of insignificant. So it's probably it's partly a religious thing. So if you live on a flat Earth, there's more chance it's a created world. But not all flat earthers are into religions or creationism, so it's not entirely that. Some people think the reason they did it is because the secondary reason was they make shitloads of money. Basically, NASA get quite a few million every single day. Like, I can't remember if it's billions or millions. I think it's like tens of millions they get every day given to them, and they do very little for that, to be fair. But yeah, so a number of reasons, basically to make you think you're in an insignificant part of the universe, when you probably live on a kind of created world.
Okay, 1 second. So they've just given a fact in their view, right? That NASA have conspired over decades, for a long, long time, and even since actually the ancient world as well. Or maybe they've doctored that evidence, presumably.
No, there wasn't any good evidence in the ancient world.
Well, at least some people postulated in the ancient world that the
they're
world
just ideas. It wasn't until '69 that we kind of knew for sure, if you believe the photos. There is a very interesting... Have you seen the documentary, Something Happened on the Way to the Moon? I recommend you watch that.
But wait a second here. Surely, them saying that they need to provide a sufficient amount of evidence for why NASA has done this, and the fact that NASA has done this, and the fact this is somehow a conspiracy to stop people believing in the Bible, or this is a conspiracy for them to make more money. These flat earthers have to then improve that. What truth evidence do they have about these things?
By the way, it's the opposite. You'd probably be more likely to believe in the Bible if you believed in a flat earth. What was the question?
No, that's what I meant. So they need to provide enough truth evidence to suggest that NASA has organised this conspiratorial thing for so long.
To be fair, they are trying to do that. Yeah.
They're trying to do this.
Well, they're doing experiments and presenting evidence that the Earth is flat. So, which I completely think is fantastic. If they later work out that it's not flat and they live on a sphere, great. At least they discovered it. They're doing experiments to show that you can fire lasers across lakes. You can take, I think there's the long-range photography of things that are so far away that you shouldn't be able to see them on a sphere. But
Scott, you're not answering my question, which is that ultimately, in this line of thinking where you question everything as you say, and everything must be vigorously tested as you say, again, how do we believe them with their explanation? Surely one of the first things they have to do is explain why the majority of the world believes the world is round. And they haven't given a particularly useful thing. You said, well, some people believe this, some people do that. Surely the first thing you'd want to establish is why exactly so many people believe the world is round, and why that's wrong, and why
you should certainly look at that aspect of things. But no, it's not the only thing. If you don't believe...
But unless you can prove beyond doubt that, what's even the point of questioning it?
No, the first thing you need to... If you don't believe you live on a sphere, the first obvious thing is to try to prove that you don't live on a sphere. Not that you don't... Okay, you should think about the reason why NASA might have lied. But no, I disagree that's... No.
Essential. You look at the established theory of what is around you in the world, and everyone does this. This seems to be the natural thing. You look at the established theory, and then if that established theory is disproven, then you argue whether it's a flat Earth. But the fact is what they've done is they said, well, I don't believe this evidence, I don't believe that evidence, I don't believe this evidence, and this is probably some sort of conspiracy, so I'm going to argue that the Earth is flat. Well, no, you need to actually prove that. Surely you need to come in and prove that it is a conspiracy and all of these things belie before actually going along and providing this alternate explanation.
No. To be fair, they are. They're showing the flaws in the photos. They're trying to prove that the Earth's flat. That's definitely.
But they're
something
not giving the reason. They're not giving
now,
the reason
as to the
why
reason,
these photos.
As to the reason, the motivation for doing it. Yes, they are giving their theories as to the reason, but I disagree that that's essential. Let me give you an example.
No. But
let me give you an example why it's not important.
Prove the whole way round that you need to get documents from NASA that specifically say, well, this is what we're doing and why we're doing it, and why we're forcing the people in the world to believe the world is round. They need to come out and say that. Otherwise, how do you believe anything, Scott? How do you believe that something outside is a tree? Is that because someone just told you it's a tree?
No.
What if it's not actually a tree? What if
I disagree. I disagree that the only thing you need to focus on is whether why NASA are doing it. That's definitely something to think about. But no, they should be trying to prove that we live on a flat Earth, and they're doing that. But let me give you an example. Let me give you one example first. If I said if I said I'd killed someone, and you said, but I don't believe you, and but I had, would the motivation for why I killed someone be important?
Wait, what? Well, I don't think that's
Would the
particularly appropriate analogy.
Okay, sorry. Would the motivation why I killed that person be relevant to whether I did kill the person?
It would. Firstly, it would not be relevant, and it's not that. It would be, for example, I'm trying to take your analogy here to something different, but it would be, for example, if everyone, presumably, who looked at the evidence about a specific thing concluded that you had killed this person, and you even agreed that you had killed this person, and everyone had agreed, and then someone came along and says, well, I don't believe it. You could be lying, and everyone here could be lying. It seems then it would be relevant, if that were to be true, that person would need to provide proof and evidence that all of these people were, including you yourself, the one who was doing it, were lying, and that there was somewhat of a reason to do it. Because it seems to me logically obvious, using the clearest thing, that in all of this you don't really need to dig deeper in that situation. Just because I haven't seen this instance, you can in a courtroom prove beyond reasonable doubt. There will always be some element of doubt if you haven't physically seen something with your own eyes that this comes to. But if you're making this grand design that the whole court were in on it, that everyone was in on it, and that the person who was doing it was in on it, you have to provide a reason and evidence for that to be the case, because otherwise,
that's not what I was saying.
Why should I even examine this question? I mean, what's the point of even examining the question?
That's not what I was saying at all. My point is, I'll stay with the same analogy, but slightly different. I'm just saying, if somebody kills someone, but you don't know the motivation, did they still kill them?
Well, that doesn't have any bearing on this.
It absolutely does, because
No.
what I'm trying to say is, your absence of knowledge of the motivation why someone did something does not change what happened.
No, but again, I think that is a wrong analogy. Here, you are taking something that is commonly accepted wisdom. And clearly you would say that the Earth being round has been, for a long time, commonly accepted wisdom. And you are opening the idea that you are going to challenge this openly accepted wisdom. Okay?
I would actually disagree that it's openly accepted wisdom. I didn't, because we didn't.
Well, it's commonly.
Sorry
accepted
for
knowledge.
I think it's a misnomer to say that we've known about this for thousands of years. We absolutely have not. We've only known about this.
The majority of societies across the world would believe this. So
we've only known for sure that we live on a sphere in 1969. Everything else before.
Wait, I'm not arguing about the facts here. I'm arguing about people's perceptions. You would admit that the majority of people in the world at the moment believe the Earth is round.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, so if you're going to challenge that, rather than going down to the nitty-gritty and proof of stuff like that, particularly when we get to complex scientific things, you need to give a rational explanation as to why all the other people in the world who believe this specific thing are wrong.
Yeah, you need to give some reasons. I think they've done that. Yeah, well, because you don't just need to focus on NASA and why they would lie, but they have given reasons. I think they're fairly good ones. To make you think, to continue the idea that we've thought for thousands of years that we are a tiny speck in a meaningless universe, and your life is inconsequential. You don't.
But
you
why?
weren't.
And how would that be done? And where's the meeting where people decided? I mean, what happened? Did one egghead at NASA come in one day and say, you know what? I hate these Christians. I hate their belief in a small universe. Let's just make up the idea of a big universe, and we'll make up this lie of the world being round. I mean, did that actually happen? You need to actually show that. You don't.
You don't need to show that. You certainly should be investigating.
Because my problem here is, I don't even believe it's possible for people to do that. So first thing you have to do is show that your belief is somehow possible. No. I mean, I would even accept, moreover, if the flat earthers said, oh, the scientists have just been misguided. I mean, that would be very hubristic. You'd say that somehow you know it was something that millenniums and decades of people didn't. But here you're to even consider the question, Scott, at first, you have to consider something, and it's worthwhile saying, well, is that even possible? Is it possible for NASA to have conspired for ages to prevent this? Is it possible? Well,
that's a valid thought, and I think yes, it is possible.
Well, okay, but then why? Why is that possible, Scott? Where's your evidence?
You don't need evidence. You need thought process. And certainly, I think you're focusing on one. Wait a minute, Luke. Let me say something here. You're focusing too much on one aspect. If you believe you don't live on a sphere and that NASA lied to you for whatever reason, you should. If you can do experiments that show that your idea is correct, that's definitely worthwhile doing.
I mean, I could turn around here to you, Scott, now and say, you're lying to me. You're not Scott, and you would be. I mean, that's not necessarily valid, because all kinds of etiquette indicates that I should accept your word. Your first initial question would be, well, why do you think I'm lying to you? Why would I lie to you? That would be the first thing.
That would fall back into our previous category of what's a reasonably good, valid question. The implications of me not being who I say I am are kind of pointless. There wouldn't be much point to it. Now,
well, I don't think there's much point to this, to be honest.
Well, I've already given you two reasons. I've already given you two reasons.
Well, I don't think they're very useful arguments, really. I don't think society has that. I don't think NASA could argue a certain thing. Also, if we take just the Christian perspective on things, where in one we're at the centre of the universe, it's a nice flat Earth that's very nice, and the other we're part of this expanding megaverse with, and we're a spot on the outlier of a sort of insignificant galaxy, insignificant star, an insignificant planet, etc. Why would that be the more attractive alternative? I mean, you could almost, it doesn't make any logical sense. Clearly the other way would be useful if people wanted to, and as the church did, the church often prevented this kind of scientific information from coming out, quite notably in the past. But, out of the two options here, it seems to me strange that someone could even invent the idea of our universe, because it's so counterintuitive.
Luke, let me give you another analogy. Supposing me and you are sitting in a room, right?
Uh-huh.
And I say to you, Luke, we're going to be here forever. Somebody has concreted up the doors and the windows. We live in a concrete box and we cannot escape. Me and you are here forever. Are you telling me that if I can't give you a good reason why that would be the case, you wouldn't go and check the door?
That is completely the wrong analogy.
No,
as well.
It's a perfect analogy, because if you stood up, you could quite. No, Luke, let me speak. I haven't finished. I haven't finished my analogy. So you could settle that so quickly. You could go up, open the door. If it was full of concrete, you'd say, "Fuck." I'll edit that swear word out. You could say, "Yeah, oh shit, you're right. I'll edit that swear word out." Actually, I won't bother. I can't be bothered. Free speech. That would be the first thing you should do. You shouldn't waste time wondering what the motive was. You can find it out, and that's what the flat earthers are doing, and they're showing that we shouldn't be able to see things that are hundreds of miles away. So why is that not a valid point?
Firstly, it's different. Saying the Earth is round or believing the Earth is round is very different from from one person telling something to one another. It's a very, very sort of different thing. It's not particularly effective as an analogy because before that, obviously, I would have had knowledge of the world as etc.
In my analogy, Luke, there was no previous time.
It seems to me that this conversation is leading towards the wider idea, and it seems to me your level of knowledge is that you are so mistrustful of all knowledge, you don't believe certain aspects of knowledge that exist with outside your given experience. I don't know how Schrodinger's cat comes into this.
It doesn't. That's because Schrodinger's cat does not come into this. Why did you bring him up?
Well, because it's the idea. It depends on my perception, isn't it? If I'm in this room and I know of nothing else, and you tell me that there is nothing outside of this room, and I'm unable to verify that because it's been concreted up or whatever, does anything particularly exist outside of that?
Well, for you, definitely not. If it's been successfully concreted up and in such a manner that you're never going to escape, the world does not exist. But actually, I would say from another perspective, it does, because just because you can't escape your concrete prison, the world still exists outside.
If a tree falls in the woods, no one's around to hear it. Does it make a sound?
I would say that's a fairly that's a good statement that people have used over the years, but it's got a really easy answer, and the answer is yes.
Okay, but ultimately, I think that it is if you're even going to bother to suggest whether a question should come up, and I'm not actually, this is perhaps where I lie on this issue, you have to give a clearer account as to why the conventional knowledge is so wrong and people have been manipulated in a particular way.
Yeah, to be fair, the flat earthers are doing that. By their evidence, they're presenting evidence that says, hey, wait a minute, we were told this, but look, we can do this, which shouldn't be possible. For example, seeing something 100 miles away. It's not possible on a flat Earth, on a spherical Earth. That's valid that's a valid piece of evidence. Whether they're right or wrong, that's a valid piece of evidence. On a spherical Earth, you shouldn't be able to see something 100 miles away.
Okay, but I'm saying here, let's just come out, and I think this is the key point, is that I'm not a scientifically minded person. I could go out and look at these things, but I'm not going to, and I don't particularly want to be bogged down in the technicalities. For me, the reason why I don't believe in flat Earth is I think it's absolutely impossible. I think it's illogical. The explanation they give for why we've been lied to about, and let's draw the distinction between that and what we were discussing earlier. For me, it is entirely obvious and clear why the BBC manipulates information in the way it is. I didn't say lie about it, I say they manipulate information in the way they do. But in the flat Earth scenario, it's just, and also I can verify that with own sources and reading different things.
Wait a minute, sources, Luke, we were talking about education and knowledge and science. Surely you should be able to verify it by observing and testing, should you not?
Well, not all knowledge is like that. So some things.
Well, then it's not science then.
Reason, yeah, not okay, but outside of the scientific sphere. I'm talking when you're talking about people actively manipulating information, and I was just comparing the flat earthers with our conversation earlier about the BBC and how both of us think that they somewhat present a particular narrative. Without presenting the wider facts around an issue. And I'm saying the difference between why I would accept the idea that the BBC is biased, whilst I wouldn't accept the flat earther notion, is that I simply think it is impossible for so many people over such a long, without understanding the very, very specific science behind it, because I'm not very scientifically minded, I'm not going to admit to being that, is that I think it is simply impossible and illogical that someone magically over time came up with this idea of a massive universe, of our common understanding. If someone just invented this as an idea, and that all instruments within societies and all the institutions within society pushed to make everyone believe this in order to pursue what? A nihilistic, strange agenda. Now, on the opposite hand, with the BBC, I can definitely see why in an organisation like that, a certain like-minded group of individuals, well-meaning, well-intentioned, who strongly believe in what they think and do genuinely think they're being neutral, feel it is their moral responsibility to push a particular agenda through what they're doing, therefore false information can come through. So there's two distinctions between that. And the main distinction is the believability of why this might not be the case.
I would like to expand, but we should probably finish soon, but maybe in the next few minutes, but I would like to expand on that and say, whilst I think the BBC is biased, I also think all of media is biased. Actually, most of media is a waste of time. They just literally, if you sometimes, if a new story comes out and you go to Google and you type the title of the story you found on the BBC or on whichever news outlet you found it on, you'll find that title almost word for word, and the story almost word for word, if not slightly paraphrased, will appear again and again and again, hundreds of times in Google. It's just literally come from one outlet and then has been regurgitated by all media outlets across the world.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's a different. I think that's a different element, and that can be. I mean, that can come under the topic of journalism, and we can talk in that more depth. I mean, I would take it that a lot of people today aren't really journalists; they're just bloggers.
Well, I would say there are very, very few investigative journalists around, or in fact, that journalists are supposed to be investigative, so I would say there aren't many journalists left. I mean, let me give you one example. You may know this one, I don't know. Recently, maybe last month, I think it was, a Ukrainian guy faked his own death, and it was reported to the media. The story went across the world internationally. This reporter is dead. He was murdered. So it was reported. The story remained for a couple of days, and then the journalist himself gave a press conference, said, "I'm not really dead. We faked my death because someone was trying to assassinate me." And basically, there were even when he was given it after he gave his press conference, that story still existed on the internet that he was dead. But it showed to me that how easy it would be to give completely fake news and to say somebody's dead, or to give out a story that doesn't have to be true, because nobody's checking the actual truth behind it, you know.
Yes, that is absolutely true. However, the caveat would be here that it did eventually come out that the person was alive.
Only because he gave a press conference. I reckon if a celebrity wanted to fake their own death, it would be pretty easy. Pretty easy these days. Quick press conference saying he's dead, goes around the world, and if you just disguise yourself, then you've got away with it, basically.
I don't think it would be easy. I mean, with people's phones and stuff like that, you could never get a minute's peace everywhere, unless you want to live the rest of your life, hovering in a cave or something. No, you didn't need to. You just need to have a disguise. You probably have to find some new friends. Yeah. But anyway, I think that's probably all for today. It was great chatting to you, though, Luke. I think we covered a lot of topics. And, we did indeed. We can certainly chat again at some point and investigate all this further. Okay. All right. And speak soon, eh? We'll keep in touch via WhatsApp, okay?
Yeah, okay. Catch you later.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.